وبركاته.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Welcome to Emirates Diplomatic Academy Distinguished Diplomatic Interview Series. Today, it's a great honor to have with His Excellency Mohamad Abushahab, our Ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium and Head of Mission to the European Union. My name is Ali Hassan al-Shahi, a student at Emirates Diplomatic Academy. And with your permission, Your Excellency, I want to ask you a few questions about diplomacy and its future.
Please.
Why does diplomacy matter? And do we still need diplomats?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Ali. It's a pleasure to be here at the Emirates Diplomatic Academy. Does diplomacy matter, and why is it important? I would say that diplomacy will always be important if you want to get over conflicts peacefully. We can see many examples around us today, whether that's in Syria or in Yemen or Libya, crises that cannot be solved other than diplomatically, cannot be solved other than politically. And there will always be a need for countries to cooperate with one another. As I say, there are numerous examples, whether it comes to crises, whether it comes to global challenges, such as combating extremism and terrorism, addressing climate change. These are all matters that no country can solve on its own, but by cooperating and through diplomacy, we are able to, or we may have a chance to overcome them.
Great. What is the most significant way in which you think tomorrow diplomacy and diplomats will need to differ from today's?
Well, I think, even in my own, among my generation, the art of diplomacy has evolved, and I believe that it's always evolving. The way we conducted our business, the way that we communicated between embassies and capital, the way that we engaged with our foreign counterparts, with the public, has really shifted, very much driven by technology, very much driven by changes in connectivity. And these kinds of changes and technological advances, they don't stop, and they continue. And we're at the dawn of an era of artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles and machine learning, which will have an impact on our lives, and no doubt an impact on how we do our business. And so there's no doubt that diplomacy in the future will have to evolve along with these changes in technology, which will force us to change the way of doing business. I mean, it used to be that diplomats would report on what's happening, the latest news that's happening in your country, in your host country. Nowadays, that's not as important because the media reports, and in fact, sometimes those involved in that event will tweet or will post on that event before you can ever do. And so the value add that the diplomats that are on the ground does shift and has to change. So the expectation is that there will be an evolution of how diplomacy is conducted, and part of what the Emirates Diplomatic Academy is certainly meant to do, and is certainly well placed to do, is to prepare our future diplomats for those future changes.
And what is, in your view, are the three most important skills of an effective diplomat?
It's hard to prioritize, but I would say that a diplomat needs to be a very good communicator, and a communicator needs to also be able to read the environment that's around them. You have to be able to connect with people. You have to be able to express and articulate your interests, your country's interests. But I think very importantly, you also have to be able to put yourself in your counterpart's shoes. There is a need for a certain empathy, even against your opponent, because if you understand what motivates your opponent, where their red lines are, where their interests are, then you're at least better able to arrive at an acceptable compromise when you're in negotiations with this adversary, let's say. So being able to put yourself in the shoes of others, being able to communicate well with others, and to communicate your own positions. And, you know, of course, there has to be a certain passion. You have to be interested in working on those issues that sometimes are difficult. It often takes a long time to get something done in diplomacy. Sometimes negotiations may take years. If you're not passionate, if you're not interested, then engagement can be difficult. So being patient, persistent after your goals and objectives is also among the skills that a successful diplomat should possess.
Great. And what would be your one key message to diplomats who are starting out on their career, as myself?
Like I say, I think these are to work on these skills. Work on being articulate, being clear, being a good communicator, being a good listener, making sure that you try to put yourself in the shoes of others, and that you're persistent and patient, because quite often, the path to peace or to a successful cooperation or a successful initiative can be very long and may require patience and persistence.
Could you share with us an example of successful diplomacy that you have participated in, and tell us why it was so effective?
Well, I think there are quite a few that I can think of, but one that immediately always comes to mind is the IRENA campaign, and this was the UAE's bid to host the International Renewable Energy Agency here in Abu Dhabi, the successful bid after all. But this was achieved because of a very clear political will, a vision that this was possible despite the odds. We were competing against Germany and Austria and others, And having that vision of this being possible, having that message of why the UAE was a strong candidate, on its own is not enough. What I think really tipped it was, as I say, through this political will, there was the affording the resources and the human capital to go after this bid, was a having numerous ministers involved in that campaign and driving the same message, having diplomats and others cooperating and involved in working on many levels was a critical success factor. And this was something that was seen as perhaps impossible to achieve or by some. This was something that some believed would be impossible to achieve. But nevertheless, through this cooperation, through this drive and our diplomatic effort at all levels, something that seemed highly unlikely was in fact a success after all.
Okay. Your Excellency, you were appointed ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium and the EU less than a year ago. What are the first actions to take starting a new position as ambassador?
Look, I think any new ambassador, before you go, you do have some lead time and you know where you're going, and one does, try to build and enhance on their information ahead of taking up the position. But it's very different once you're there on the ground. I think understanding your environment, understanding I would say digging a little deeper to understand the place where you are is very important. Understanding your capabilities is also very important. So you need to see what kind of team do you have, what kind of resources you have, and what is it that you can actually achieve in that in your new environment, and then setting out a plan. So once you know the environment that you're in and what capabilities you have, you set a plan, you set some goals and some objectives of what you'd like to achieve, and begin to execute on that plan. Throughout this time, networking is very important. So you network to get that understanding. You network to be able to achieve those goals that you've set for yourself, and you network to know where you have partners and additional capabilities, let's say, that you might be able to leverage, and that's something that you do. I would say throughout the time that you're there, you would work to understand your environment, or to deepen your understanding of your environment. You would work to enhance the capabilities that you have, and you would adjust your plan to make it more ambitious and more capable as your network and understanding grows.
Great. What are the particular challenges associated with being an ambassador to a multilateral organization such as the European Union?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, being in European Union, the UAE ambassador to the European Union, you know, obviously we're on the outside. It's not like being at the UN where you're one of the members of the club. Here, there is a club that's a very important club for the UAE, and of course you're on the outside. But nevertheless, it's very complex in its structures, very complex in its processes, and it has numerous stakeholders, you could say, or parts for the embassy to engage with. Among the EU institutions is the European Parliament, which is made up of 750 plus members, and many committees that are relevant for the UAE, Foreign Affairs Committee, delegation for the Arab Peninsula. There's a UAE EU Parliamentary Friendship Group, and of course all the various political parties. So there are many stakeholders to engage with in the Parliament. There's the EU Commission, which has 28 ministries, you could say 28 commissions and commissioners, and you know, many of those are ones that the UAE has good potential in cooperating with. And then, of course, there's the European Council, and that's made up of the European member states. And you know, among European member states are countries where the UAE has deep and important relations, and in order to advance interests of the UAE, in order to capitalize on opportunities for the UAE, engagement with these partners is desirable and necessary.
On behalf of all the students, I want to thank you for this interview, and I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Mashkoor. Thank you.